When I was a kid,
They have big eyes.
Where's mom?
Yeah. Okay, we are now streaming live, so don't say anything you regret because the world can hear, but probably mostly they can hear me. So keep going. They're talking about Marie Kondo, I think.
And habitation.
Oh, good. Those are good things. For anyone tuning in, we'll start soon in 5 minutes, but we want to make sure that the sound is working. So you should tell us if it's working. Yeah. It's so meta because you could see me and then me.
It's triple meta.
Whoa, Tretta.
Tremeta.
So weird. Wow. Okay. I guess I'll just leave it down there and follow along.
That would be quite triple.
Hello. Sound via telephone, Chili. It's there?
So top.
Checking. Check the things. I turned the video off for a moment. What? Something weird happening right now? It's a little delayed.
Oh, is that what
Yeah,
it is?
yeah.
Because you're not talking.
Yeah.
It's talking.
Yeah. Okay.
That's gonna be very.
People are just coming in. Gonna stop the video until we're ready. Shtisel page,
What street?
the live video.
Oh, I know how, sure.
Okay.
Wait, I have to just, I gotta sign it. All right, so do this, and then I share. I don't know how to share.
Should be like an arrow there.
Hello from Budapest.
Oh, hi Budapest.
Oh, share. Share to group. Shtisel.
Thank you.
That's why I have a master's in engineering.
That's it.
Look, there's somebody from Budapest.
It's all for Shtisel, you know? Yeah. Just have some more folks walking in. Folks on the live stream will start in 62 seconds. Hello, hello, willkommen. Okay. Rabbi Antin will be joining us. He's out of Shiva Minin. He'll be here in just a few moments. But just want to respect the time of those of our friends that are joining us from across the world in case it's 3 a.m. or something. I don't know, what time is it in Budapest? I have no idea. Yeah, many different places. And please bear with us with this new technology. We're trying to figure out how to be a shul in the 21st century that teaches its humans and its constituents across the world. So welcome to, hi, Rabbi Antin. Welcome to Shtisel Part 3. We're around over halfway through our series. After tonight, we'll have 2 more classes on Shtisel Explained. And then guess what? We move into Pesach. So send us your questions, send us all of your topics. I know this is really weird, but I'll stop in a minute. It's just so strange. But tonight, what we're going to do is move a little bit away from some of the questions of marriage and gender and to a different topic, which is chinuch, questions of parenting. And also Rabbi Antin is going to discuss smoking in halacha. And we thought it would be fun to call the class Shulem Shtisel, all about him, because I'd like to talk about him as a dad and as a smoker. What is it called? Ma'ashen v'ma'ashen, right, exactly. So we're going to begin tonight's class by just showing a couple clips, and we will remember how to do this. I have faith. One moment. Someone want to make joke about Shulem Shtisel while we're waiting here? Anyone? Nope. Okay, here we go. Got it. Okay.
אבא? רציתי לדבר איתך על משהו.
תראה למטה. לאיפה הם רצים כולם?
מישהו הציע לי היום מישהי חדשה. נפגשנו הערב.
מי זו?
אחת, רוטשטיין.
רוטשטיין. נכדה של רב עזריאל.
רוטשטיין מצפניה, הבת של שמלצר. אלישבע, האלמנה.
נו.
אני כבר לא ילד.
בסדר, לא אמרתי כלום.
אז מה אתה אומר? נראה לי שאני אפגש איתה שוב.
אתה מבקש רשות או עצה?
לא יודע. אני מספר לך.
אתה כבר ילד גדול, לחנך אותך מאוחר מדי. תחליט לבד. איך באמת הולך לך שמה עם הילדים?
באמת, לא קל לי. בכלל לא קל לי.
מה אני אגיד לך? אם אתה עושה להם תשבוב, למה שהם יעשו לך יום טוב? אני אגיד לך את האמת, אני לא מתפלא בכלל. ועכשיו אתה גם מספר לי שאתה נפגש עם האלמנה הזאת, רוטשטיין.
אלמנה פעמיים.
די, לא רוצה לשמוע, תעזוב אותי. תראה, אתה צריך לעבוד חכם, עם שיטה. תלך רגע לסלון, יש שם בתיק שלי שקית שחורה כזאת, תביא אותה רגע.
מה יש שם?
אם לא תביא, לא תדע.
נו.
תשב, למה אתה עומד? מה זה, אתה יודע?
נו,
אני רוצה לשמוע את התשובה. בקול.
בננית.
יפה מאוד. עכשיו בוא תלמד משהו חדש שיעזור לך בחיים. אם ילד מתנהג יפה, אבל לא סתם יפה, אלא משהו מיוחד, עוזר לך בכיתה, משהו כזה, אתה נותן לו בננית. לא צריך בננית שלמה. אתה יכול לחלק את זה לכמה חתיכות, וכל פעם לתת קצת.
ואם הוא מתנהג לא טוב?
יפה. אם הוא מתנהג לא טוב, בצורה רצינית, ושום דבר לא עוזר, אתה עושה לשם ייחוד ונותן לו פאץ'.
חשבתי שכבר לא נותנים היום לילדים פאצ'ים.
חויסך שבטי, אין דרך אחרת. אבל מה צריך להיזהר? בלי טיפת כעס, אתה מבין? אם אתה מערבב את הרגש, זה מסוכן מאוד. הילד צריך להרגיש שאתה עושה את זה בצורה שכלית. ושזה לטובתו, כי זה מה שצריך לעשות.
אני לא בטוח שהבנתי. בכל מקרה, נראה לי שאני אלך לישון. גוטה נאכט.
קיווה, בוא רגע. בוא שנייה. תעמוד רגע פה. פה.
היי, מה זה? למה?
מויח פה לב. צריך לדעת מתי להביא את המוח, מתי להביא את הלב.
Skipping ahead for a minute.
ישראל, גשת כאן. גשת כאן. תעמוד פה. תוריד את המשקפיים שלך, שים אותם כאן. השם ייחוד קודשו, ברכו שכנתי. ממוכנם זמון, לקיים מצווה חינוך. יש לך כאן למקום שלך.
So, just switch back here. So, as you can see, those scenes were obviously meant to be kind of referencing each other. So what I wanted to do this evening is ask the question, what does the movie, the show, what is it trying to teach us about the Mitzvah of Hinok, of educating children? The Mitzvah of Hinok, who is it on? Who's responsible for educating children? What are our options? What do you think? Who? Parents, what? Mother, father, teachers, who else? The community, who is the Mitzvah of Hinok on? And what are the parameters? And not only that, I think, if you look at this like Facebook group, there's this big question, how could he hit his son, right? Is that really okay? And so we'll discuss all of these questions. And if we're just gonna pull up the text here. Okay, so here we go. Shtisel class 3, Shkoyach, technology, love it. So as you heard, Shulem said a little thingy-do under his breath before he slapped Kiva. Now, what is that? It's called the L'Shem Yichud, a special declaration of intent prior to performing a mitzvah or reading certain tefillot. There's actually some controversy about this prayer that I'm not going to go into, but I did want to share with you that it's a mystical Kabbalistic saying that allows the person doing the mitzvah to get in the zone before the mitzvah actually happens, particularly when it's a mitzvah that doesn't have a bracha associated with it, which is interesting. What are the ones that you might have seen in the Siddur that have a L'Shem Yichud before? Anyone know? Biras HaOmer, right? You can, coming up right around the corner. So that's what he was doing. And then Kiva repeats it. It's interesting. If he's using it as a way to kind of set the scene for the mitzvah that's about to happen, there's something very different going on in his mind at the moment he's saying L'Shem Yichud in the classroom and at the moment his father is saying L'Shem Yichud on the porch. I think it's a very interesting way to consider how we take a breath and pause before we do mitzvahs. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. The next thing I want to do is talk about what is the mitzvah of Hinok from? Where do we learn it from? And it comes from a number of different sources. There's a discussion about whether it's a biblical or rabbinic mitzvah. Most agree that it is a rabbinic mitzvah, mitzvah d'Rabbanan. And the word chinuch is connected to some other words in Judaism. For example, Hanukkah, right? Chanukat HaMizbeach. It actually doesn't mean educating like what we're doing right now. It's not the passing over of information necessarily. Rav Hirsch actually says it's dedicating something for a lofty and holy purpose, right? You're dedicating, or you're training something and getting used to something, which is how most understand what exactly the mitzvah of chinuch is. It's accustoming someone to becoming used to performing certain activities, just as we did Chanukat HaMizbeach. We accustomed the Mizbeach, the Mishkan, to doing certain kinds of activities and certain kinds of jobs for each of the kelim of the Mishkan. Okay, so what's the source? There's lots of different sources here. The reason I pushed it, to teach this topic tonight is because of the second one. What do you see up here? On the PowerPoint, the second pasuk is from the V'yigadet levincha bayom hahu, which we know from the Pesach Haggadah, right? So I've been thinking about, as we're getting closer and closer to Pesach, it's really the holiday of chinuch, of figuring out what it means to educate children, not only your biological children, but actually if you're a teacher, like if you're a melamed, what is your obligation to educate? And that is one of the sources, but you also have the first source, which you recognize from what? The Shema. And the third source, which you might have heard thrown around from Mishlei, Chanoch lenar al pi darko, train a lad in the way that he ought to go. And if you do that, he won't swerve from it, even in his old age. So many, many different sources for the mitzvah of chinuch. This one is really, really interesting. It's about Abraham Avinu. And the Meshech Chachma actually says, you know what? Educating kids, this is a biblical mitzvah. Why? Because Abraham Avinu did it for his children and the members of his household, the people around him. And therefore, he says, Ha'ikar me Abraham. We learn actually the mitzvah of chinuch from Abraham Avinu. So many different sources. But we have to ask the question, what exactly is included in the mitzvah of chinuch? Have you ever, raise your hand if you've ever heard a child under the age of 5 say, that's muktzah? You ever heard that? Yeah? I recall very fondly standing outside in my bedroom with our neighbor, and we would like point at cars as they drove by and just call everything muktzah, like everything that walked by, just like muktzah, muktzah, right? So there's actually a certain age at which we actually don't know the difference between muktzah, which is actually a very specific area of law within Hilchot Shabbat, and other things. And what's really important that some people don't know is that you are really not obligated to require a child to do mitzvot until they reach the age of what's called chinuch, until they reach the age of being able to understand exactly what is going on. Children under the age of chinuch are not obligated to perform mitzvot, and we should have no expectations that they should be doing mitzvot. So I'm telling you all of this because I'm going to get to the question about Shulem. The question is going to be, isn't he done with that? Like, didn't he like already do chinuch? Like, when do you think chinuch ends? I'd like to hear what you think. Shout it out. This mitzvah. Ellen. Okay, so Ellen's comment is that there seems to be ongoing chinuch, and you're right? So we're going to see that your instinct is why Shulem feels like he can say l'shem mitzvah chinuch, right, and slap his son. But what would be perhaps your halachic or mitzvah argument that chinuch ends at a certain point? What point? Bar mitzvah. Why? What happens? What's the ritual that we do at bar mitzvah? Baruch sheptarani, right? I'm done with this. I'm done with the punishment from this child. You are on your own, kid. As the joke we make literally every time. We should think of some. Yeah, we need a new joke. If anyone has any suggestions on the Facebook Live for new jokes while we do that, that would be lovely. But in any event, so we have to ask the question, what exactly is the end point for the mitzvah of chinuch? And I wanted to go backwards to tell you where it begins. Now, each mitzvah, this is actually really cool because, many different mitzvot have very specific parameters, but the mitzvah of chinuch is unique in that we had the pasuk in Mishlei that says you have to educate each lad according to his or her way, right? So that means that the mitzvah of chinuch is very subjective. Positive mitzvot that have an action associated with it, it all depends on the age and intelligence or cognitive development of each particular child. Like sukkah, lulav, shofar, the age around for that of chinuch, does anybody know? 5 or 6, we say. But it happens to be that a positive thought-based mitzvah, something with machshava, not necessarily where you do a thing, like you put something on or you shake a thing, that actually is older. Why? Because you have to be able to grasp abstract thought, right, in order to be able to do the mitzvah properly. One question we always have to ask when we're educating kids, young kids, with certain particular mitzvot is, are we educating them to do it properly? It's actually probably a problem to give somebody a plush lulav and esrog and have them shake it all the wrong ways, because then when they grow up, it will be difficult to retrain, right? Definitely hug them, right? And put them in your bed next to your, maybe not actually, teddy bear. But anyway, so the youngest gedra, the youngest parameter for chinuch will be the lo ta'ases, the things that you're forbidden from doing, because just like a child might need to be older to understand an abstract concept like we are sanctifying Shabbat now through wine. They need to be quite young in order to understand they can't like put an iron on their face, right? So in a way, a lo ta'aseh, like you may not do this, that is a much younger age than the other mitzvot. Okay, so who is obligated? What do you see here in the photos and the pictures? Who's on the right? Shulem, right? Or is that the other way? Who's the little girl? Ruchami, okay. So what do you see her doing there? She's reading to the kids, right? I don't know if you remember that scene, but I put her on there because I think in the context of the show, it's very easy to kind of consider Ruchami as a parent in the context of the show, but actually she is not obligated in the mitzvah of chinuch. That is not her responsibility. What she is obligated in doing is the laws of kibud avaim, right, of honoring her parents. And sometimes her mother needs her to do certain things for the children. And that's what she's doing. There's also an interesting halachic discussion about honoring your older siblings. And so I'm not going to get into that, but I think it's an interesting related halacha. And what you see in the middle, who's that? The Vaira alav shalom, during the young years. That was during the scene of the unplugging the phone, which was, I was going to show you that, but I figured the room would just be too angry, and it's too early in the week for that. And then on the right you have Shulem, and there's a discussion in halacha about if a mother is obligated on the same level as the father for a mitzvah of chinuch. Without going super into it, I will say that there is at least one Rishon that says that she is, and that's cited in the Mishnah Berurah, that both of them are obligated in chinuch, though there are many, many contemporary works, including a very famous piece by the Rav about the difference between perhaps a mother and a father's education. And you can actually extend that to just think about what does it mean that two different people parent very differently in one family. Thought from the crowd? No? Okay, I'm going to skip this, if that's cool. So how old do you have to be how old does the child have to be for you to not have to worry about their chinuch anymore? So this is so interesting. There's actually a Gemara in Kedushin that implies that you need to continue educating your child as long as you still have influence over them. So look at this Gemara here. It says that as long as your hand is still on your son's neck, meaning you're able to kind of twist them one way or the other, you should help them find a wife. And if you think about the scene that we were looking at before, what was going on? It was all about marriage, right? It was all about Shulem being frustrated that he can't find his son a wife. And actually the age here is specified here in Kedushin, the ages being 18 to 24, but actually it's discussed and beyond, right? As long as you still have influence over your child. And so, Ellen, this relates to what we're saying and what everybody in the room is thinking all the time, right? When either your students or your biological children or adopted children, whatever it is, you have to ask the question, do I still have some sort of influence in the person's life? And if so, I actually am still obligated on some level in their chinuch. And here's a really beautiful piece from Rav Moshe, which is blocked by my tiny talking face. Can I move? Yeah. Okay, so it says here in the Rav Moshe, Pashut shechiyuv chinuch libno ika gam kishenigdal. It's simple that you will still be obligated in chinuch when your child grows up. Ukemefurash bekedushin lamed, as we just saw in Masachet Kedushin, as it says, chanoch lenar al pi darko. You have to guide a child as in the way they ought to go. And then he quotes that Gemara. And continuing on. Okay. Now about the slappage. Let's talk for a moment about this. What's your sense about it? Permitted, forbidden? Do you think he did something wrong in that community? I'd like to hear. Shulem. Yes. And I will repeat whatever everyone says for the people watching online. I would love to hear your opinion. We're going to see what Rav Moshe. It's not advised. Okay. Can someone give me perhaps a halachic reason why it is not advised? Advised? Yeah.
If the child gets angry, the child may hit back.
Gorgeous. Beautiful. Oh man, Debbie quotes the Gemara in Maseches Moed Katan, which says that hitting a parent is actually possibly a problem of lifnei iver, of putting a stumbling block, hitting a child, I'm sorry, putting a stumbling block before the blind, right? Because what are you doing? You're enraging your child. And that child, particularly if they're an adult child who's ready and willing to like put their fisticuffs, that could be a big problem because then they could violate prohibition. And that's a problem of lifnei iver. Any other thoughts about why it would not be allowed? Slappage. Or why it would be allowed? Rabbi, what do you think? Yeah, why? Give me a positive. Why might you be allowed to do it? Okay, because you have to make sure you're on.
Probably to make sure that they learn how to do mitzvahs and make some positive, well, not really positive reinforcement, but maybe some strong reinforcement.
Okay, so there is a discussion in the Rambam that Rabbi Antin was discussing some strong reinforcement could help in directing a child towards their way, right? Now, many of the modern poskim say no. Most beautifully, I think, is Rav Shlomo Valbi, who has a beautiful book on chinuch. He actually says that hitting your children, maybe it's a problem of lifnei iver, but worse, it's a problem that creates emotional distance between you and your child, which makes it less likely for them to actually remain on the straight path. So whether or not that's like a physical slap or even a stern look that's not necessary, he discourages from doing that. Anything that would create an emotional distance, because he says that would not actually be strategic, which is interesting. So here in this Rav Moshe, he is asked this question: are you allowed? Is it possible to hit your student? Right? It's literally just a question here in Rav Moshe. And it says, Asur lahamelamed lahakos hatalmidim, bo afilu rak haka kala, ve'af lo lahafchidan ba'alma. Okay, so, and you're not allowed to hit even lightly, even you can't threaten to hit, right? You can't even threaten to hit. And at the end, he quotes a Rambam, Maimonides, that there was a practice to hit with like a small, soft belt. Like that was the practice. But anything more than that would be a really big problem. And Rav Ovadia also has a tshuva on this, that one should do their best to act pleasantly and mercifully with their children. And it's interesting to think about how the halacha perhaps interfaces with real life, because we all know real life is a thing. And halacha guides us, right? It's supposed to be there with us. But I wonder, sometimes we watch this show, and I think what's beautiful about it is that it's also real. It's not a fake, well, it is, it's television, but it's supposed to imply that life happens too. And so I'm curious also, as Rabbi Antin comes up to talk about smoking, like to what extent are the halachot really aligned with the way of life? And to what extent are people living, right? And the halacha is right next to them. So that's Rav Moshe. Now, I wanted to share this Gemara with you because it reminded me of the bananit, this banana bar, and it's very hard to see, isn't it? Yes. The Gemara describes a situation in a place where there was a drought, okay? And Rav comes to this particular place, and the rain's not coming, and the Shaliach Tzibor then goes down and starts davening, and he says, Ashiva Ruach, may the wind blow, and what happens? Yeah, I'm just keeping you awake. And then he says, Umarid Agashem, right? And let the rain fall. And what happened? The rain falls, right? And so Rav is like, who is this guy? This is amazing. He broke the spell, right? Hashem is finally listening. He goes up and he says, what are you? What are you doing? And he says, what am I? I'm an educator. I'm a malamed, right? I'm a teacher of children. And what's unique about me? I teach the children of the rich and the poor the same way. And in that time, you can assume that folks were being privately hired. And he's saying it doesn't matter whether they're rich or they're poor. I teach them. And if they can't pay, I don't take anything from them. This is really fun. And what else? I have a fish pond. And any child who's neglecting their studies, what do? I give him the fish to calm him down, and I soothe him until he comes and he learns. So what are you thinking of, my friends? You got it? Oh. Remember that? Yeah. So, I would love the writer of Shtisel to please text me and ask me if he learned this Gemara, because I think it is a perfect way to fit in the fact that he cannot resist giving that bananit, right? That banana bar to that kid who is making trouble. And he seems to have this way, probably because it's what resonated with him, of figuring out what each child's fish is, right? Like, what's the fish as opposed to, a slap, right? And here you have this whole subplot, this dream, this whole sequence of him using this fish to calm a child, to keep him inside, to keep him with him the whole day. And he ends up painting this fish, which actually feels to me, and I don't know, but I get a sense that his mother was more of a fish/banana bar than a slapper, right? So it seems to me this is an expression of him missing perhaps the way his mother raised him. Okay, and then finally, and I'll turn it over to Rabbi Antin in a moment, we'll stop for questions. Can you see this? No. Okay. Okay, this is like one of the most infuriating scenes for me in the whole show, in the entire show. Sorry. So what's going on in this scene? Does anyone remember? Not her. He actually comes to her house because that's a thing that happens. He's like, hey, and she says what? She says, Shulem, can we go to this concert, right? And he's like, what? Well, why now? Why now? I know we have to go now. We can go to a concert anytime. And then there's this awkward pause, and he says, well, do you have any chicken soup for me? And then she gives it to him, and then slams the door on his face. Now, the reason I'm bringing it here is because there's also a discussion in the poskim based on how Avraham Avinu did hachnasat orchim, did hospitality. The question is, when it comes to chinuch, when it comes to educating your children, is it better to teach them directly, engage them, or just model it? Okay, so there are three kind of approaches theologically about chinuch, right? Which is best, and there's of course a way to justify each one. But Rav Moshe, he's really a star tonight, Rav Moshe Feinstein, but he has a beautiful piece that says that Abraham modeled and did not necessarily ask Yishmael to join him in the mitzvah of Hachnasat Orchim, because it's better to do something yourself as opposed to sending a shaliach or engaging somebody as a part of it. And what he did is he modeled. Now, why did I bring this picture? Because if you think about what Shulem was asking from Kiva in that scene where he slaps him, what is he asking from him? Settle down, boy, right? Like, pick a woman, like, do it, like, make it happen. And here you have him repeatedly, over and over and over again, not doing it, right? Kind of avoiding the issue himself. And so I think as a meta chinuch issue, you can see how perhaps if he modeled it, it would be a different situation than if he would do it and then prevent Kiva from seeing a healthy relationship come to fruition. Sammy. Oh. Okay. All right. So Sam says that he hit him because he was going after a divorcee and not. I'm sorry, a widow. Sorry, Bucky's. Yeah.
I thought he did it to give an example of how to treat like it shifted. That scene shifted from the Elisheva get married part into when he asked Kiva, how's your teaching going? Kiva says, I have trouble controlling my class. So I kind of took the slap for that part.
All right, I'm Moda, right? I think it's a bit of a stretch, but I think what's important to note is that you see the ways in which his patterns are replicated in his father, right? This kind of like non-committal nature. And you think about it in the context that we asked the question in the frame of the class, is Shulem a good dad, right? Everyone tries their best, right? That's not the point of really, there's not a yes or no answer to that question. But I do think there's something really important to notice about how he models something he does not want for his son. With that, I want to open up to questions. Anyone have any questions? Any other issues of chinuch, of education or parenting that came up in the show that made you pause? Yeah, Bashi.
Morning, I was at a show where the rabbi gave a brief lesson on chinuch, but it was about how young can a child be when he or she learns how to mourn.
Yeah.
So like when
It's interesting.
She can do kriya and when she go to a cemetery. So
yeah,
the opposite of this.
Yes. So Bashi's mentioning the halachot of Avelus. Oh, did I not repeat it? Okay, so Bashi asked about Avelus, of mourning for children. And that too, it actually, Rabbi Antin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's this issue of doing the kriya on the child because of agmas nefesh, right? It like makes it feel really sad. And not necessarily that the mitzvah of Avelus is on the kid himself, but it's a part of making it, relevant to the entire community. I'm not sure, but I believe there was something unique about Avelus in terms of chinuch. Any other questions? Paul? Yeah. So Paul Blank, who himself is a wonderful teacher, he says some good advice was offered by Shulem, which is that you try to distance yourself from the emotion of the moment, which I think L'Shem Yichud is good for, right? You can be like, well, what am I doing? Like figuring it out before you react with your student or your child. I think that's very powerful. Okay, anything else? And with that, I've had a burning desire to know why it is and how it is that everybody in that show is smoking. So,
All right. I don't think you'll find out by the end, but we'll try. Okay, good evening, everyone. What's wrong? Okay, part two. Okay, I can just click it. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
So, let me make sure my hands in. Okay. All right. So, as Rabbi Fruchter was teaching her class, I was trying to reflect on whether or not there's actually a connection between the chinuch, the education, the parenting question, and the smoking. And I don't know if there really is, but there's one in my mind. And it's the following, and I think it really says a lot about chinuch. Maybe it says something about smoking as well, which is I remember having a friend growing up, and his father was a chain smoker. He was very addicted to cigarettes and smoking. And he would always tell my friend, his son, you better not smoke. And he would threaten him like crazy. And maybe he even hit him, and without saying it, all these things. He was very, very strong about my friend not smoking. And I remember that whenever I think about my friend's father, he would like, he was so addicted to smoking that right after shul was over, he would keep a pack of cigarettes in the shul before Shabbos. Literally, right when it was over, he could light up at home. He would always tell my friend, you can't smoke, you can't smoke. And I kind of lost contact with my friend. And then a few years ago, I ran into him as an adult, and sure enough, he was smoking. And the idea is, your kids are gonna do as you do, not as you say. Is that that's to say? Your children are going to do as you do, not as you say. So you can say this and that all the time. And the best form of chinuch, obviously, is role modeling, which was Rabbi Fruchter's last point. So that's my connection, because otherwise there's no real connection. Okay. So smoking. So it's interesting. I just want to share a little bit in terms of my own kind of feeling about smoking, upbringing, in terms of my relationship to. So growing up, as you all know, I grew up in the Haredi community. For the most part, at least in America, they were very much against smoking. You could not smoke at all. The yeshiva that I went to is called the Talmudical Yeshiva Philadelphia. If you got caught smoking in the yeshiva, you would get expelled, maybe kicked out of the yeshiva. Even for the students who were over the age of 18, who were legally allowed to smoke, it was totally forbidden to smoke in yeshiva. But then I remember that when I was after high school, I went to Kol Torah, which is an Israeli yeshiva, a yeshiva in Israel, very similar to a lot of the students in the yeshiva were probably pretty similar to some of the people that we encounter in the show. And everybody smoked. Everyone smoked. In fact, when I was in America, I never thought I would ever smoke. Why would I ever smoke? Maybe I shouldn't admit this on Facebook. Should I stop right now? Okay. But when I got there, like literally everyone smoked. All the Israelis were like, I don't know, like 7 or 800 Israelis and 30 Americans in the yeshiva. And all the Israelis, many, a very high percentage of the Israelis smoke. In fact, the year before I came there, and it's going to be one of my topics, they had just made a rule that you were not allowed to smoke in the Beit Midrash, where people studied. But before that, you would walk in and everyone was smoking as they were learning, okay? But the rule was, as soon as it hit 12 o'clock, I don't know, what 12 o'clock midnight, people are still learning, 12 o'clock, everyone would pull out their cigarette and they would start smoking in the Beit Midrash. And even during the day when you were not allowed to smoke, that just meant you couldn't smoke in the Beit Midrash itself. But literally, people were standing right outside the Beit Midrash in the hallway coming in. Everyone is sitting there smoking. So if people wanted to learn while they were smoking, where would they go? They couldn't sit in the Beit Midrash, and you want to stand outside with your sefer. So everyone went to the library. So you walk into the library, and it's like full of smoke. I mean, so this was the atmosphere. They had this very, I don't know where this minhag came from. Maybe it's in other, I'm sure it's in all Israeli yeshivas. But when someone became a chassan, when someone got engaged, and so like there were students in the yeshiva, they would get engaged. We saw all of the shidduch scenes, right? In Shtisel, they get engaged after like 2 or 3 dates. They would come back to the yeshiva to announce to all the other students that they were engaged, and everyone would sing Siman Tov Mazel Tov. What was the minhag? They would come with a carton of cigarettes and give a cigarette to every single student in the yeshiva. I think that was my first cigarette. So, this is what they would do. I mean, it was really very, they had no sense of this being an issue at all. So anyway, so that was sort of this stark contrast between America and Israel. And I really didn't think about it that much, of course, until I saw Shtisel. So let's take a look at some of the pictures, even before with Rabbi Fruchter's presentation. But here you have a number of scenes out on the Merpeset, on the porch. That's a great porch. I don't know if I envy the house, but I really envy that porch, to be able to sit out there. So you have, Shulem and Akiva smoking. Here he's waiting for a shidduch date. I don't remember if this was with Esty. Someone's about to show up, and he is smoking. By the way, you remember with Akiva? I don't remember who it was with. Maybe it was a Libby. I don't remember which person who he was going out with. When he would describe like how long does it take to get from place X to place Y? Oh, this was a two cigarette walk, a 2.5 cigarette walk. So like literally, this is how they're thinking about it. Okay, here, Shulem and Nucham could not agree on anything, but the one thing they could do together was they could smoke together. You like my little squiggly lines? You like the lines? It took me a long time to figure that out. Wait, you don't see the squiggly lines?
You mean the circle?
The circles, yeah, but I figured that out. Okay, in the middle. Okay, all right. So then let me get some of the Torah. Okay, so we see all the smoking. Hold on 1 second. Okay, there we go. See all the smoking. We got Shulem and Nuchum. So is this permitted? According to halacha, is it permitted to smoke? That's the question. Okay, why should it or should not be? It certainly does not say in the Shulchan Aruch whether or not you're supposed to smoke or not. Yeah, Stafford, is it permitted or not? For health reasons, exactly. There's a pasuk in the Torah that says, "Ushmartem me'od nafsho seichem," which means you have to be very careful about your soul, your health. You have to guard. There's a mitzvah. There's a Torah halachic obligation to watch your health, to be healthy, to act in a healthy manner, and therefore smoking is a violation of not being healthy, the prohibition against doing things that are not healthy. So how is it possible that all of these people who are so scrupulous in every single mitzvah, they're so careful, and yet they're smoking, they're violating an explicit halakha, an explicit commandment? So there are a number of sources. Can people see that? How do I move that away? The man?
Drag your face elsewhere.
Okay, better? Okay. So so this is the tshuva from Rav Moshe Feinstein. Again, Rav Moshe is the hero of the Star of Tonight. So, and this is obviously, it might not be the posek that they would turn to right away, the people from Shtisel, but certainly someone who would be considered very respectful. And Rav Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva where he introduces the concept of Shomer Pitaim Hashem, or Shomer Psaim Hashem, as they would say it. Shomer Psaim Hashem. What is Shomer Psaim Hashem? It's a verse from Tehillim. I forgot what chapter. It's in the middle of Tehillim. And it's praising Hashem. You're so compassionate. You're so kind. You do this for me. You do that for me. And Shomer Psaim Hashem. What does that mean? It means Hashem guards those people who are really foolish, okay? Those people who are foolish, Hashem takes care of. And it's a concept, here's the idea behind it, at least as it's described in halakha. Actually looked it up in the Art Scroll. Art Scroll translates it as Shomer Pitaim Hashem. Hashem safeguards people who are simple, meaning people who are vulnerable, who need a little extra help. God's there with them. That's probably the simple meaning. But also, Pitaim also means people who are fools. And that's how it's understood over here. Meaning, if you're doing something that's foolish, that's not very wise, even then Hashem will save you. Even then Hashem will take care of you. And this concept turns into a halachic idea that Hashem will safeguard you. So there's this truth of Moshe Feinstein where he quotes some of the places where the Talmud uses this principle. Some of them are just, it's kind of interesting. I looked up some of them. One of them has to do with hakozas dam, bloodlet, okay? And the Talmud talks about you could bloodlet on this day, not on that day. It has all these different things. And then saying, some people wanted to do bloodletting. I'm trying to remember. Some people wanted to do bloodletting on Friday. Why? Because right after you bloodlet, you need to make sure that you have a good meal. So you're going to have a good meal on Shabbos. So some people would do it on Friday, but that wasn't the right day. And no problem. Why? Shomer Psaim Hashem. Even though it's a foolish thing to do from a medical perspective, don't worry, God will take care of you. Another very famous Gemara about Shomer Psaim Hashem, there's actually a big debate about it, but the Gemara says, there's a whole discussion, there's a whole issue with birth control. By the way, one topic that we could do with Shtisel is the whole thing with Gitti and abortion. I don't remember if there was any, birth control specific questions, but that was a very, very interesting question. By the way, one thing that did strike me, they didn't, when we think about people in these communities, we think about people with 12, 13, 15 kids. They had a lot of kids, but the numbers were not quite that high. But anyways, there are many issues with using birth control and using what's called a moch, which was maybe like some sort of an ancient form of a diaphragm in order for birth control purposes. And it's really a problem for different reasons, either because of prurevu, the mitzvah of procreation, or there's another mitzvah called the Shevis Yitzra, which means even after you fulfilled your mitzvah of prurevu, there's still a mitzvah to continue to have babies. So there are issues with using what's called a moch, and it's also a problem of what's called hotzah zar levatal. It's a problem of spilling seed. So the question is, are women allowed to use this moch, which I think it's a form of a diaphragm, when they are having sex? And there's a famous Mishnah, that, according to one opinion, that says that Shlosha nashim, 3 women are allowed to use them. Women who are nursing, pregnant, and a katana, a minor. Okay, so for us, this is horrifying. What does this mean that a minor is even in a relationship having sex? It's obviously, it is horrifying. It's not just from our perspective. It's in the ancient world, this might have happened. And what the Gemara is talking about is that if there is a woman who was a minor, then she could use it because it could be dangerous. And also the pregnant and the nursing. And then the Gemara, another opinion in the Talmud, it might be in the Mishnah, said, no, these women should also, even though there's some danger, like I guess the Gemara is worried that if a woman is nursing and then she becomes pregnant again, she won't be able to continue nursing her child, and then there might be a danger to the child. The Gemara says, no, they should continue having sex in the regular way. And what about the danger? Shomer psaim Hashem. Hashem will watch fools. This is not a concept that we normally lead with, don't go to the doctor. No. But anyway, so how is that defined? So Rav Moshe in his tshuva, he goes through this whole thing, and basically he says, it can't be that you really are in danger. So if you look here on the top of on this slide, Rav Moshe basically says, as long as it's only a minority chance, right, a small chance, it's not a statistical minority that some dangerous thing will happen, and the person really wants to do it, they have some sort of a tsar, some sort of a pain from refraining from it, then Hashem will watch the fools. All right, that's the way that Rav Moshe develops the idea. And he says here, Uladvarim ke'elu dami, ishun sigariot. And to like those things that where the Gemara says that it's Shomer P'sayim Hashem is also like smoking cigarettes. She'elu haragilim b'zeh, people who are accustomed to smoking, he really means if you're an addict, nenim mizeh ma'od, you really enjoy it. So that was one of the check boxes in order for you to follow in this concept. Umitztarim kishem sigariot, and they are in pain when they don't have it. If you're addicted to smoking and we tell you you can't have it, that's more difficult than even not eating, right? So therefore, he says it follows. I don't know if this is definitely not true. Rav Moshe finds and says, and now in that, damage that could happen to you, smoking, is only for a miyut, small minority of people. Right? This was he wrote this in, I think the truth was from 1981. Okay, Tavshin Mem Aleph. But that's what he tries to say. Because remember, that was one of his principles. If you're doing something that there's a statistical probability that you will get sick from it, then you can't rely on the fact that God watches the fools. It's only if it's a minority and it's something which is very hard. So Rav Moshe argues that it's really a minority chance, and he goes on and he says that even though we see many people who are sick and they're in the hospital and they get sick and even die from this, but he says that's only people in the hospital. He says there are so many people who aren't in the hospital who they could smoke and nothing happens to them. So the fact that some people do it and get sick, it's Shomer P'sayim Hashem. That Hashem will watch it. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what I think about this, but in the next slide, is it frozen? It's
Click instead of.
Click what? Oh, no.
No.
Okay, there's the button. Okay, it's frozen. All right, let me see if and I don't have my sources here.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyways, in the next source,
Sorry.
that's okay. Oh, okay. So, but then he does say, let me move that away. This is the next paragraph. You see it up on your screen. So he says, as a matter of halacha, is it permitted to smoke? Yes. Why? Shomer P'sayim Hashem, because Hashem watches it. It's interesting. We're using this verse from Tehillim in order to say that according to halacha, you are allowed to smoke. Hashem will protect you. But he says, Vada min aroy l'chol ish. But certainly every single person, it's appropriate, uv'prat lifnei Torah, and certainly Torah students, shlo la'ashen, not to smoke. Me'achar shu chashash sakanta, because there's a concern that maybe it'll be dangerous. Ve'ein b'zeh shum to'eles. And also, what do you gain from it? There's no benefit to smoking. V'gam hana le'elu shlo hurgulu b'zeh. And also, there's no hana, meaning it's true that once you're addicted, it's hard to stop. But just don't start in the first place. There's no benefit at all. A person should not become accustomed or addicted to this. kids to do this. Even if he himself or she is addicted, don't let your kids. So problem is, as I mentioned before, with my friend's father, he followed Rav Moshe. He didn't let his kids smoke, but it didn't help because that's what he did. He says, there's really another problem with smoking. It's engaging in too many worldly pleasures. That's a concern that probably most of us would think about. It's preferable that people should refrain from extra pleasures in this world and desires that take you away. My friend, I'm your friend, Rav Moshe finds. Okay, very interesting shuvah from Rav Moshe. So as a matter of halacha, and this I think is accepted from many, many people, especially in the Haredi community. As a matter of halacha, is it permitted to smoke? Yes. Is it desirable? Is it a good idea? Absolutely not. Rav Moshe Fine says not. I could give you now I think, and I've heard people explain this tshuva, that it's like what's called a limud schos. Okay, Rav Moshe looked around, especially, 40, 50 years ago, and he sees so many religious Jews, so many Jews are smoking. So to say that all these people are violating a prohibition, that he has a hard time doing that. So he gives a halachic way why it's not violation, but then what does he do? He tries to change for the next generation. Although I keep going back to the Rabbanit's point, which is if the older generation does not change, then it's going to be very hard to change the next generation just by telling them not to do it. Okay, so as a matter of halacha, it's permitted, but not a good thing to do. Stafford. Is there prohibition against being an alcoholic? I mean, there's no prohibition against being an alcoholic. It's not a halachic status, but you can't do things that are harmful for you. So, right. Well, we don't say that, but maybe if there was a real halachic discussion. See, obviously, the thing is, we can't say that you can't drink wine. I mean, obviously, if someone is an alcoholic, by the way, so it's frozen again. I don't know. If someone's an alcoholic, sorry about that. If someone's an alcoholic, then obviously they should not drink, even for, let's say, the Seder or for any other reason, right? But we have in halacha many times where we're supposed to drink, for Kiddush, for Seder, on Purim even, right? So we do have times that we are maybe even, there's a mitzvah or whatever, there's a question about those things, but obviously you should not do it if it's going to be done in a dangerous way. Okay, yeah, Debbie. Oh, we're going to get to that question. You know what? Let's jump to that question. We'll skip this for a second. If I can move back. Okay. I also noticed that there was no smoking. No women were smoking. There's tons of smoking with the men and very little smoking with the women. Does anybody remember this scene? This is when Ruchami goes to the library. Okay, remind me about this scene. So first of all, I don't even know if that's a real cigarette or not. I don't know. Vape? What's it called? Vaping? I don't know. Anyways, so that was the librarian. She is not, I don't think she's Orthodox or observant, whatever. She's certainly not from the Haredi community. She was the one who was giving her all of the secular books. And then she was reading them to her siblings and telling them it was Chana, it was Anna Karina. It was very funny. But anyways, so this is the librarian. And so the librarian has something, whatever. I don't know, maybe she was a smoker, but when she was inside, she was just had a cigarette in her mouth. And then then the librarian asked Ruchami if she could watch the library for a few minutes. He said she had to go out. Maybe she had to go out to smoke. And then Ruchami watched, and remember what Ruchami is doing here? Look what it says there. For a righteous man falleth 7 times and rise up. Shiva yipol tzaddik v'kam. That's a verse from, it's in one of the holy books. I don't know, where's that from? What? Mishlei sounds good. Proverbs, right? That sounds like a proverb. Okay, it's probably from Mishlei, which means that a tzaddik will fall 7 times and get up. This is like the idea of resilience in Judaism. No matter what happens to you, you should be able to get up. You keep getting up no matter how much you fall. And now who is writing this letter? Ruchami is writing a letter. Who is she writing a letter to? To her siblings, pretending that she's the father. I mean, it's really actually very interesting from a literary perspective. I think this is to the brother, Mishlei. This is from Very good, Rabbi. Mishle, what parak? What chapter, verse? Too late. Okay, it doesn't matter. But anyways, so she's writing this is actually a letter that her father's writing that she's writing in her father's voice to her siblings. I think this one's to her brother, the next brother. And the letter goes, now that you're becoming a bar mitzvah, you have to know. And he says, there are going to be difficulties in life. This is what the letter says. But a tzaddik will fall 7 times and get up. Very, very interesting, especially given Lipa's life and what was happening to him. So it's interesting that Ruchami put those words into her father. But anyways, as she's sitting there, she's smoking, or not smoking. She puts the cigarette in her mouth, as you see. So I don't know what's going on there. Maybe she was imitating, huh? Well, I don't know. Either that or she was trying to imitate the librarian because this was like a move away from religion. I saw, again, the Facebook page, Shtisel, let's talk about it. Someone made an observation there that Ruchami, with her secular books, the fact that she was going and reading these secular books, and this was definitely not within her community's understanding of what's the appropriate thing to do. So maybe she felt like she was, moving away. And so someone suggested that her whole turn towards Chanina and the learning and the getting married and all that, maybe that was her way of saying, oh, I went too far. I got to go all the way back in and just so that's interesting. But anyways, either she was imitating the librarian or maybe she was writing from her father's perspective, and her father also was smoking. If you notice, even in the scene when he was in, where was he? Argentina. And he didn't even have, he didn't have the payas, they weren't in yet and all that. And he had a mustache, I think, for a little bit, but he was still smoking. Just that you can't leave, that he didn't leave behind. But anyways, that's Ruchami. So anyways, but the question in the show. So I found this tshuva from Rav Moshe Stern, the Ber Moshe. This was actually a Hungarian rabbi. He actually lived in Hungary. I forgot the name, Debrecen maybe. Debrecen, he was the chief rabbi there. Then he survived the Holocaust. He moves to Brooklyn, and very, very Haredi rabbi in Brooklyn, very respected. And look at this question. Nishalti imshari lebal lechos biyad b'no shebechek imo v'hinida. I was asked if a husband, this is going to connect back to last week's class, if a husband could hold on to his child's hand while the child is being held by the mother, right? While she's a nida. Okay, so last time we talked about nida, menstrual impurity, and Rabbanit actually went through the harchakot because we talked, the harchakot are the things that we do for a husband and wife to be separated from each other so that they won't come to have sex during the time of nida. One of them that we talked about last week was the idea of the separate beds. But one of the other harchakot is not having any physical contact with each other. So, husbands and wives during that period, they don't touch each other. So one of the things that they don't do, since you don't touch each other, the question is, can you touch the baby that's being held by the mother? Okay, so it's like one step removed. And there are all these questions here that the Ber Moshe was asked, that the Rav Moshe started. Like questions, the mother's holding the baby, and it's really cold outside, and the baby's like little hat, rolls up the ear, and the mother can't do it. So can the father put the hat back on? Like really very, very technical, specific questions, which probably most people in this room would never ask a rabbi. But anyways, so he says, I answer, if you're really stuck, stuck and you want to play with the baby while the baby's being held by the mother, as long as you're wearing something else like a glove or something, let's make 3 steps removed. Anyways, that was the question. But then, okay, Rabbi, how did you move it? The click, that doesn't work. What do you do? When you press something? You just click. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna get it next time.
It's okay, it's good. It's
Huh?
a bit.
Okay, so anyways, so look what he says there. So in the middle of the tshuva, he's talking about the baby. Then he wants to know a different question. Can a husband, if the husband's smoking, can the wife, light his cigarette for him while she's a nida? This is the question. So he says, look at there, we're having a lot. The Rashak in Shira Tara Oser lo lahavik ner miner shabiyad ishto. He cannot light up a candle. This is just a candle. Let's say it's it's Hanukkah, right? So you have your shamish and you want someone else to light the shamish for it. And the wife's in nida, you can't light one candle from another. That's like too intimate, okay? Even though there's no physical touch, but that itself is considered intimate. The divrei Chuvas Yad Eliyahu, if you look in the Chuvas Yad Eliyahu, in Hatutin, I'm not sure what that is, or tfetin, maybe it's something, but look at the next line. Uviyameinu, in our days, devada isur gomer shehi tadlik ha-cigarette shalo. It's a total prohibition for the wife to light a cigarette for the husband while she's in nida. This would be considered to be too intimate. The kal v'chomer, now look at here's the line, talking about women smoking. The kal v'chomer, if she's one of the new kinds of women, how do you translate? A modern, a contemporary woman, shechidshu kalos, that they have innovated like levity, shema'ashenet ba'atzma, that she herself smokes. You can't even imagine a modern woman doing this. This is a very disgusting, a very bad thing. You have to stop the women from smoking. So it's interesting. But he says, so certainly the man can't light her cigarette. That's even worse, he says. But the point is, you see a community, he has no negative response to the men smoking. He's just telling you halacha that the wife can't light a cigarette. But a woman who's smoking, this is so, and I've heard ideas, it's not sneeze because it's, drawing attention to her. I've heard lots of things, but it's so interesting that to the extent that it's in certain communities, especially in Israel, in the Haredi community, it's so accepted that so many of the men are smoking, but the women, it's such a taboo for them to smoke. It's really interesting. But anyways, it's interesting that in Israel, except that one scene with Ruchami. Okay, now I want to go back. Now, how am I going to go back? Because you just showed me how to go forward. I don't know how to go forward. Do you know how to go back? Okay, quick. No, I need to go back a few more. Is it working? No? Oh, okay. All right. So last topic. We just have a few minutes. All right. You like my little squiggly line here? Okay, circle. This is with Tzvi Aryeh. Where's Tzvi Aryeh? He's in Koilel, right? Tzvi Aryeh is learning. Remember the scene with the mouse, right? Yeah. Where his wife is driving crazy. That she has to go ahead and his wife is driving crazy that there's a mouse, he has to leave. And because of that, he is not able to get the job of being like the next rabbi in the kola or whatever it is. But anyway, there was one scene in there I noticed where they were learning together. And look, you see, there's a guy who's actually smoking in the Beit Midrash. There you go, okay? So and there are a number of scenes where people were smoking in the Beit Midrash. So that got me thinking, about the question about, okay, we already said Rav Moshe Feinstein said, you are allowed to smoke, but it's not such a good thing to do. But the question is, are you allowed to smoke in the Beit Midrash? So what would be the question of smoking in the Beit Midrash? So here I found you a tshuva from Rabbi Avad Yosef, who's not someone that they would be turning to, but he has very good sources. This is Rabbi Yosef was the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, really the most respected posek for this in the Sephardi community. Sheila, question. Are you allowed to smoke in shul? Bisman shalomdim sham shir b'halacha, at a time when they're studying a shir, b'daf yomi. Okay, so can you go into the daf yomi shir and smoke? I don't know if he thinks there's a difference. He's just giving different examples. By the way, there were a few great scenes. And even though the smoking obviously bothers me, and I think it's a terrible thing, and people have to be more careful about that, and it's not healthy and it's wrong, but I think that there was some beautiful scenes where Shulem sits down at the dining room table late at night after a long day, and he pulls out this giant Gemara, and then he was listening not on his smartphone, but he was listening on this old I don't remember, it was a phone program, and he's listening, I think, to the Daf Yomi. He's listening to a shir. And he's learning, and he has his glass of tea, and he starts smoking as he's learning, and there are a lot of scenes where he fell asleep over his Gemara. It's kind of amazing what happens when you don't have a TV in your house. What do? You come home, and he has to learn the daf, and that's how he falls asleep. Learning the daf. But anyways, the question is: are you allowed to smoke when you're learning? When you're in the Beit Midrash? When you're in the Beit Knesset? When you're in the shul? So it says here, tshuva, answer. So this is just the first source that's quoted. The Megillah, we learned in tractate Megillah, Tanar Rabbanan, Balte Knesiot, ein noagim bahem kalos rosh. You cannot act in a light, how would I translate that? Like a light-headed, that means a frivolous way. You can't act in a frivolous way when you're in the shul. Now the Gemara gives examples of what is frivolous behavior that you're not allowed to do in the shul. Ein ochlim bahem, the ein shosim bahem. You can't eat or drink in shul. Okay, so that's the halacha. So now let's go. Shoot, went the wrong way. Okay, let's go on in the source. Okay, so now it continues. Let me get my head out of here because I can't read the source. All right. So then he quotes a little bit later on, because of, this is line number 9, because of Hagon, if I do a line here, then people who are watching will be able to see. Okay, that's good. Because of Hagon, Rav Chaim Pelagi is a very important Sephardi posek, says, the Sefer Chaim, in Sefer Chaim, Shenira Pashut Shehu Adin She'asr La'ashein Sigariyot B'Beis HaKnesses. The same way that the Talmud says that you're not allowed to eat and drink in the shul because this is frivolous behavior. Reb Chaim Pelagi, a very important Sephardic posek, I don't know, I'm kind of making this up, maybe 18th century, he says you're also not allowed to smoke in the Beis Knesses. Shehu B'chal Kalos Rosh. It's also considered frivolous behavior. And now look a little bit further down where I have it underlined, line 9. It's obvious you can't use like I don't know if that means like normally in the front of the shul. I don't know if it's the ner tamid or a lot of places they would light a candle. So what do you want to do? You want to light from that candle. That's for sure inappropriate behavior to do that. And then this is quoting the Ya'avet from Yaakov Emden. If you go a little bit down there, let me just move this out of the way. We have line number at the end of line 16. So if you read from here, if we would stop right here, then those people in Tzvi Aryeh's Kollel, right, who are smoking, are they doing is it permitted what they're doing? No, it's Kalos Rosh. It's frivolous behavior. But look what it says. Aval bevate midrashot. But if you're in a Beit Midrash, what's the difference between a Beit HaKnesset and a Beit Midrash? Beit HaKnesset is a synagogue where you daven, where you pray. Beit Midrash is a place where you learn. Now, in a Beit Midrash, you're also going to daven, right? After the share is over. But what's the point of a Beit Midrash? Study. In a Beit Knesset, in a synagogue, sometimes you also have a class. But the point is shul. So the question is, what is this room? Is it a shul for davening or is it a study hall? So in a shul, he says you're not allowed to do any of these things. Uh-oh, I lost my thing here. Okay. But he says, but if you're in a Beis Medrash, shechachamim v'talmideihem kovim yeshiva b'hem lilmud lamed, that students and scholars are sitting there and they're learning and they're teaching. V'tzrichim l'ashein tabak, they need to smoke. They need to smoke, right? Maybe to concentrate, I don't know. Ein lahatrichem l'lechet l'bayit lahadek hasigaria. What are you going to do? You're going to say that every time Tzvi Aryeh and his friends want to have a cigarette, that what do they have to do? They have to go home in order to smoke? What will happen? Sheyesh bazeh mishum bittul Torah. This is going to be a waste of time from Torah study. That the rabbis, when they set up the concept of a Beis Medrash, they set up with such idea that you could. And that's why also there's an idea that if you're in a Beit Midrash, maybe you can also eat and drink. If it's a shul for davening, it's considered forbidden. But if it's a Beit Midrash, then maybe it will be okay. And then he just concludes. Nope. Then he concludes and says, no, wait a second. Sorry about that. Okay. So then he says, Asr la'ashin cigar b'vesak. That's a filiyesh. I think this is the sikum. Hold on 1 second. I'm just being. Oh yeah. Bisikum. What's the conclusion here? The summary of everything. Asur la'ashin cigar b'vesak. You're not allowed to smoke in the shul. There are some people in the middle of the tshuva where they thought that the problem with smoking is that you're in the presence of the Torah. So they said, let's make an extra covering on the ark and then we'll be okay. He says, no, that doesn't help you because the problem is you're in the shul itself. It doesn't matter how many coverings. If they're studying there, someone who really smokes a lot is allowed to in order to smoke while they're learning. So basically, according to Rabbi Vad Yosef, for my fellow yeshiva students, not me, but what my fellow yeshiva students did when I was in Kol Torah in Israel, that as soon as the clock struck midnight, all of them would start smoking in the Beit Midrash. It was permitted according to halacha. Rav Moshe Feinstein would say, not such a good thing to do. It's dangerous. We would all say it's dangerous, but it's a matter of halacha. It's okay. So just to review what we have so far, we have the concept of Rav Moshe Feinstein saying that as a technical matter of halacha, it is permitted to smoke because Hashem will watch fools. That's the idea based on halachic context, but highly, highly discouraged. In Israel, a lot of people do it, especially in the Haredi community, they do smoke. We saw a discussion about even if men are smoking, but for women, definitely not. This is certainly problematic behavior. And then the discussion about smoking where? Are you even allowed to smoke in the Beit Midrash? And there's an idea that if that's going to be mevatel Torah, that's going to take away from your Torah study, then you could. Obviously, in our community, and I think there's a very strong difference between the Haredi community in America and the Haredi community in Israel. In America, it's very, very much frowned upon, at least my recollection of it, that's very much frowned upon. And I don't know exactly what's happening in Israel, but maybe one lesson that we'll leave you with, which again connects what Rabbanit spoke about and what I spoke about in terms of the idea of chinuch. We see, Shulem, as different as Akiva was from Shulem, he still smoked just as much as Shulem. And I think that that's really true about anything in terms of being parents and grandparents. Obviously, we have to be mechanchim, we have to do the mitzvah of chinuch, of educating our children and students and all that in terms of our actions. And really, as Rabbanit said, very important thing for us to think about as we're getting really close to Pesach and thinking about that special night. You got it to Levincha, the idea of teaching your children or telling your children, but it's not about telling, it's really about demonstrating, the way we live our lives and how important all this stuff is. So if I don't know if we're still going to have another class next week, right? Or next week, maybe I think we'll have 2 more classes. So we're going to have 2 more classes before Pesach. Laila Tov, everyone, thank you for joining. I saw before people joining from all around the country and the world. So really great to have everyone here. Stafford. You can't smoke while you're davening, that's for sure not. But what we're saying is that if you are in a Beit Midrash, then it's considered, it has the status of a Beit Midrash, and then that's not what we would say, and I wouldn't say that. I'm just saying that from the perspective of those people that say that you're allowed to smoke, if you're smoking, then you could smoke from Beit Midrash, even though you would not be allowed to smoke in a shul. Okay, Laila Tov, we're happy to answer any questions, but we're going to stop the Facebook.